Thank you. It's a real pleasure to speak with you today. I'm going to talk about an early preservation effort that probably hasn't gotten enough attention. Historians haven't adequately covered it, but I think it's pretty significant. It was to protect a huge area that was called Navajo National Park. And I list two parts of it, the Glen Canyon and the Rainbow Plateau. And it actually went beyond those. I'll talk about what those are. This is an aerial view looking south down the Colorado River and Glen Canyon. And you can see the San Juan River coming in there from the left, the confluence. So the section of Glen Canyon that was involved with this is below that confluence, so it would be off to the right of this photo. But the main area was beyond the San Juan River. Navajo Mountain dominates this scene, and the area surrounding Navajo Mountain was called the Rainbow Plateau. Bears Ears National Monument has been in the news a lot, and we know about the controversies and so on. There were a couple of other initiatives earlier in that region. The preceding one was a proposed Escalante National Monument, which was lobbied for from 1935 to 1940. And there's a good Utah Historical Quarterly article about that if you're interested. But the area south of Glen Canyon, the San Juan River, is what I'll focus on today, the proposed Navajo National Park. And so that was really a pioneering preservation effort from 1929 to 1934. This is a map made by the geologist Herbert Gregory in his early geological report. And you can see the area that he calls the Rainbow Plateau. So that's where it got its name from him. And then east of that is the Sagi Mesas and Monument Valley. And actually this park proposal extended that far east. So it was a huge area encompassing much of the territory shown on this map. All south of the San Juan River and Glen Canyon. It's really a stunning area if you go into it. Very awesome beauty and pretty unique. So it's definitely of the caliber national park. Some really surprise riparian areas. Of course, Monument Valley, it went that far east. The cliff dwellings of Navajo National Monument, this is Keat Seal, and the iconic Rainbow Natural Bridge. These are all within the area that was proposed to be preserved. This history is tied in with this man, John Wetherill, who was my great-grandfather. And he was the one that was most consistent down through the years in advocating for this park. He and my great-grandmother had a trading post at Kayenta, Arizona, trading mainly with Navajo people. John was a backcountry guide and outfitter. The first mention in the public record we have is from this man, Charles Bernheimer. We heard a little bit about him yesterday and his 1929 trip up into southern Utah. He was a wealthy New Yorker, but this is a memo sent to Department of Interior people in early 1929 announcing a presentation that he was going to make showing photos of this area to the people back in Washington, D.C. And obviously he was prepping them for this proposal for a national park. He also, about a month later, provided the Park Service with this map. And so it shows all these areas and some options on what he thought needed to be protected in this park. Bernheimer started coming out to this country in 1920, and he fell in love with it. He was a very unusual person because most people of his stature in New York wouldn't want to camp out on the ground and go through all the hardships of exploration, but he did. This map, by the way, was drawn by Dick Sprang, who we heard about yesterday. He's a very accomplished artist, and just showing some of the routes from some of his earlier expeditions. And then Bernheimer wrote this book entitled Rainbow Bridge. At about the same time Bernheimer started lobbying for this park, another man, Byron Cummings, wrote a letter to Senator Carl Hayden of Arizona, and he urged protection of this area as a park. He said, if it's withdrawn from private entry, a permanent and healthful blessing could be conferred upon all lovers of the wonderful outdoors of northern Arizona and southern Utah. Cummings was a professor at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and he had gotten into archaeology very early. He was also one of the members of the 1909 expedition to Rainbow Bridge that brought that to the world's attention. There was a parallel effort going on that started almost exactly the same time, though, and that was to annex the area called the Paiute Strip, which was north of the Utah southern border and south of the San Juan River, to annex that to the Navajo reservation. And so this created a conflict that actually was the demise of the proposal, and I'll go into that. It was initiated by an Indian agent from Tuba City. This Paiute Strip had kind of a convoluted history. In 1884, through executive order, it was withheld from sale and settlement and set apart as a reservation for Indian purposes. It didn't say what tribe. And then in 1892, Benjamin Harrison reversed it and opened it up to public domain. 1907, Department of Interior designated it for use of Paiute Indians. And then in 1922, the Department of Interior returned it to public domain. So it was kind of the heart of this proposed park. The Park Service themselves were kind of taken aback by getting this proposal. This is the assistant director, and he says, people are advocating for this. I'm against it. So you would wonder why something of such outstanding beauty and value and possible benefit to the public would not be enthusiastically embraced by the Park Service, but it wasn't. John Wetherill was lobbying all this time, and in 1930, some men wanted to go up the Colorado River in a motorboat in January with very little experience. So he talked them into letting him go, and one of the other two men, Pat Flatham, went up. They had built this metal boat that's shown at the bottom of this article, hoping to try it out. It didn't work out at all. They ended up finding an abandoned wooden boat from the USGS surveys and took that. And instead of testing the metal boat, they ended up going for the purpose of taking photographs and movies to convince the government that this was a worthwhile place to protect. My great-grandfather despite numerous hardships and falling in the icy water and losing their food, said, "Had a wonderful trip through a country of much grandeur and beauty. I doubt if it can be surpassed anywhere else in the world." So obviously he felt that it was very special. Well, the Park Service finally decided to look into this, so they sent out two key people, Roger Toll and M.R. Tillotson, who was the superintendent of Grand Canyon National Park, to check it out. And they gave a very glowing report. They said this proposed national park would have great interest to the American public because of its unusual features of ethnology and archaeology, as well as because of the unique and remarkable scenic qualities. So that got the attention of the people in Washington, but they were still scratching their heads. This was an administrator who read the report, and he said he was really puzzled. He said that these men agree that this is of national park standard, but others who have not seen the area do not agree. So it tells you a little bit about the bureaucracy that was going on. But however, not much longer after that, in 1932, the director of the Park Service, Horace Albright, and some of his cohorts showed up in that area to see it for themselves. This is a photo of the dignitaries. Marshall Fennon, superintendent of Mesa Verde, M.R. Tillotson of the Grand Canyon, John Wetherill, my great-grandfather, who was custodian of Navajo National Monument, Horace Albright, the director of the Park Service, and Frank Pinkley, who was in charge of the Southwest National Monuments. Albright fell in love with the area. John Wetherill took him to the top of Navajo Mountain and down to Rainbow Bridge, and he was just in awe of it. He wrote this letter to Neil Judd, who is an archaeologist with the National Museum in Washington, and talks about the joy he had of seeing that country. And then my great-grandfather wrote a little note. He says, "I think that Mr. Albright is properly enthused over this country that you helped to discover." Neil Judd had been on the 1909 Rainbow Bridge expedition as well. And he thanked him for his help in getting Horace Albright to come out and see it for himself. So from that time on, the Park Service was a big advocate of going forward with this project. However, there was some pushback from some of the ranchers up in Blanding, Utah, and they had various reasons for that. So over a period of time, there was an agreement worked out with those men. And one of the provisions was it is agreed that the scenic tracts are to be developed by the National Park Service with the cooperation of the Indian Service. So by this time, there was the expectation that the Paiute Strip would be annexed to the Navajo Reservation, but that the Park Service and the Navajo people would work together to make a national park as part of the reservation. And that was put in writing as part of this agreement. So Horace Albright, the director of Park Service, wrote to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs and asked him what was going on with this and kind of reminded him of the agreement. And the commissioner sent him a copy of the proposed bill that had been written and said, we would prefer, it didn't mention the park, it just mentioned annexing the land. We would prefer not to disturb the bill in any way at this time, but wait its enactment and therefore take up with you the matter of creating the proposed national park and national monument following this annexation. So it was kind of just a gentleman's agreement at that time that things would move forward. as the advocates for this wanted. Another thing that happened to kind of try to further the appeal of this, a man named Ansel Hall, who worked for the Park Service as a naturalist, came by my great-grandparents' home and in the fall of 1932, and John Wetherill recognized his abilities as an organizer of expeditions. So he said, my great-grandfather said, there's an area of some 600 or 700 square miles lying between here and the San Juan and Colorado that certainly need looking into. Say, Mr. Hall, why don't you organize an expedition like you've been sending out for the past 5 years for scientific exploration? And the idea was scientists could go out in there and study that country and really prove that it was of the caliber that would support its designation as a national park. That became the Rainbow Bridge Monument Valley Expedition, which went on from 1933 to 1937. But for most of that time period, the park proposal was a dead issue, and I'll explain why. This is just one of the reports that this Rainbow Bridge Monument Valley Expedition put out. There were much material, and there's a group now called the Onward Project that's revisiting this history. So ultimately, the Paiute Strip was added to the Navajo Reservation, and the Commissioner of Indian Affairs told the Navajo tribal leaders, you decide what you want to do about this national park. In July of 1934, they issued a proclamation, and basically, you can read it, but they said that there's much of scenic beauty on their land, and they can manage it better than anybody else. And at the bottom, therefore, it is hereby resolved that all areas of scenic beauty and scientific interest which require preservation are hereby reserved as Navajo parks, monuments, or ruins, and managed by the Navajos themselves with the cooperation of the Indian Service. And basically, they wanted to boot the Park Service off all Navajo land. This would have included Canyon de Chelly, which didn't happen, but basically they didn't want any Park Service involvement with their land. So this was the nail in the coffin for the Navajo National Park proposal. Horace Albright, the director of the Park Service, had resigned right before this resolution came out. But he told somebody, I wasn't used to defeat. I always won. I always got what I wanted. It has hung on me. It has hung on me all my life. He was extremely disappointed, and I'm sure my great-grandfather was as well. So, in retrospect, we kind of have to wonder what would have happened, what would have been different today if this had gone through. And in some ways, it might have been a blessing that it didn't, because you can imagine Park Service, infrastructure, people, crowds, bureaucracy associated with that. And on the other hand, the Navajo people haven't completely managed it the way they suggested they might. You can go to the Navajo Backcountry office and get backcountry permits to visit most of this area, and it's still pretty pristine as far as no roads in a lot of it, and beautiful areas. There are a few trails, awesome experiences. On the other hand, it's been overgrazed, so when you go in there, almost every place shows signs of grazing, and it hasn't really been promoted as a place for people to go. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and I wouldn't offer any opinion as to whether it was good or bad that this didn't go through, but I think it reflects the fact that there were people back in those days, probably earlier than